don't you?
No. Do you?
Oh, no.
How hard
Oh,
can
my
it be?
God.
Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I am SportsLogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Sunday Helmet Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. Today we're going to be talking about the Hagerstown Flying Boxcars, who play in Hagerstown, Maryland. They're an independent team. I'll be talking later on in this episode with Sky Dillon of Sky Design Studios. And of course, Dan Simon will be here with one of his studio Simon Stumpers. Right now, I am so pleased to be speaking with Chuck Domino, who has been involved with so many baseball teams, but he served as the principal consultant for the Hagerstown Flying Boxcars and was intimately involved in the process, served as one of the main points of contact on this, the whole process of naming the team and coming up with this brand and working with Sky Dillon, the designer, who I'll be speaking with later on in this episode. Chuck, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, Paul. Glad to be with you.
This Flying Boxcars brand has really been well received. This has been fun to see out there in the world. It's new this off season, so they haven't yet taken the field. It's a really fun name, and it's a interesting tie to the history of Hagerstown, Maryland. Can you tell me where that name comes from, and what does it mean?
Okay, well, we ran a contest like a lot of times we do when we're searching for a new name to see if the public would come up with an interesting name, and they usually do. A lot of names I've been involved with have come from the public. This particular name was kind of on our short list before we even went to the public vote, asking for suggestions. We thought Flying Boxcars. We knew it would be entered, quite a few times. They were the Hagerstown Suns, a very generic name. There's the Phoenix Suns. There was the Jacksonville Suns baseball team for a long time. No one really knew. I didn't know what the derivation of Suns were for Hagerstown. It certainly isn't a Florida city, and I've been there for a few months, and I haven't seen the sun a whole lot in this winter. So I didn't really understand that one. So we wanted to come up with something very unique to the Hagerstown area. And in the 1950s, the Fairchild Company was producing an airplane that was called the Flying Boxcar. And it was a plane that was used to transport supplies and troops, and mainly was deployed in the Korean War. But over 1,300, close to 1,500 of these flying boxcars were produced in Hagerstown for the benefit of the entire country. So it has a lot of history, a lot of unique history to Hagerstown, and I think it really tapped in to the aviation industry and history of Hagerstown. And they do have an aviation museum here where they have a couple of different style of boxcars that are displayed there. And we actually did our launch and announcement revealing the new name from the back of an actual boxcar plane that we backed into a hangar and opened the clamshell of the back of the boxcar, and there we were on a podium announcing the name of the team. So it had a nice tie-in. A lot of people not familiar with Hagerstown, not familiar with the history, scratch their heads and ask what it is, and I think that's what's good about a unique name. When people scratch their heads, they say, "I like it, but what does it mean? What's the tie to Hagerstown?" And then you explain, and then light bulb goes off, and they go, "Oh, that's perfect. We love that name."
Well, so that was definitely true for me, right? I mean, I saw the logos, and I did an article about it for sportslogos.net, and I had to go research it. For me, it was okay. What is the connection between this? Obviously a military plane and this place. You said it was from the 50s. I discovered in the course of research there that there were about 10,000 people in Hagerstown employed by Fairchild. Still, that's 75 years ago, right? And you said that you got this suggestion a lot from the community of the Flying Boxcars. So even though it was a long time ago that they stopped producing these here in town, still very much a part of that Hagerstown community. Why do you think that is, that this particular airplane, that hasn't been produced for 75 years is still so much part of the psyche of this town?
Well, I think it's, we're talking second, third generations now, and they probably have a picture of a flying boxcar or a model plane of the flying boxcar somewhere in their home, from when dad and granddad and great granddad worked at the Fairchild factory, and it's just kind of matriculated down through generations. People talking about the flying boxcar. It's just really, Paul, I had no idea when I moved to Hagerstown anything about the flying boxcar myself.
Yeah.
But I thought it was when I first heard it, just like a lot of good minor league names, you pause a little bit and say, is that going to work? And then the more you hear it, the more you put Hagerstown in front of it, and then you couple it with the history and the passion of the town. Then it all, kind of, makes sense. But yeah, I think it's just, more or less kind of a generational thing handed down from generation to generation. And that name has been in people's minds for years. Even the young people might not have really known the history, heard the name probably, didn't even know that, like, the history of the plane. They knew it was a plane, but they didn't know exactly what kind of plane it was. And just like I didn't when I started, researching and looking at it. It's a plane that was actually a large box where they were able to put in like a trailer, like back right in a trailer of supplies right into the back of the plane and take off, and then drop these supplies, all over all over different nations where they were doing battle, unfortunately. But it was a great piece of history, not just for Hagerstown. I mean, it was a great piece of history for Hagerstown, but it was servicing the entire country.
So, as I mentioned in the intro, you've worked with a number of teams on their brands, and minor league baseball being what it is, a lot of those have been sort of character based, like really fun, sort of cartoony. I've used the word wacky sometimes, because and I love this part of minor league baseball. This is a more serious brand. It still has a character. It's got this pilot, but he's, this sort of muscular sort of chiseled jaw guy, and he's on an airplane. It's definitely not wacky. It's a more serious brand. Was there something about either this brand or this community that led you to say, okay, for this team, an independent team in the Atlantic League, we're going to go with a more sort of serious approach rather than with some of these, really sort of, fun cartoony brands that we've done with other teams?
Well, we started going down, and when you start this process, and we use Sky Dillon, Sky Designs for this specific logo, and we started down a couple different paths, and one of the first paths was the actual plane being a cartoonish looking plane, where the plane was like a personification of a pilot, the actual plane itself. But it was too much along the lines of the Aberdeen Ironbirds, and we wanted to differentiate ourselves. And then we went to just a boxcar, just the plane itself, with no character in the plane. And then we thought that was too stagnant, almost too serious. So we kind of merged the two and decided to put the pilot inside the plane, kind of an oversized pilot. He himself is almost as big as the plane itself, and he's sitting in the plane above it, and he has a bat over his shoulder. And we wanted to kind of be serious, but also be a little comical, in the sense that he's an oversized pilot, and he's sitting in the plane, he's above the plane. But it looks like we wanted to portray the image. It looks like he's flying to work, flying to the stadium. He's ready to land this boxcar right on the field, jump out and play ball. And that's kind of, the behind the scenes reasoning with the logo, whether people immediately make that connection, but that's what we were thinking when we decided on the final logo.
And is there a different approach for you? I mentioned that this is an independent team in the Atlantic League. Is the approach different for you with a team like Hagerstown and this new brand versus, an affiliated team that's maybe, changing its name after a certain number of years? Does the fact that it's an independent team change your approach to this process?
Well, I would say this: if you asked me this question 5 years ago, or before COVID, before Major League Baseball kind of took minor league baseball under its umbrella, I would say it's exactly the same. You just kind of, whatever sticks to the wall, so to speak. The crazier the better if it works. No restrictions, and that's kind of where we are now. Now, the difference now with affiliated baseball under the Major League Baseball umbrella, they have to approve everything. And I think the days of the crazy, trash pandas, yard goats, rubber ducks, flying squirrels, all the names that I was involved with in affiliated baseball, I think those days might be over now that Major League Baseball is kind of, some got a little out of hand, I think, and Major League Baseball, like for a while there, the pizza rats were being considered in Staten Island, if you remember.
Oh, for
and
sure.
I think I can't say for sure that was the moment Major League Baseball said, wait a second, this is going a little too far. We don't want our New York Yankees affiliate to be called the Pizza Rats. I can't say that was for sure, but I for some reason I remember that being kind of the moment where Major League Baseball decided to draw the line and said, we need more input into this. So I think now with independent baseball, there's going to be more freedom. We were not going to be policed, so to speak. And so it was the same approach I've always had. But if I did a name now for an affiliated team, I think it would be a lot more restrictive.
Boy, that's really interesting to hear you say that, because I think a lot of fans of this industry, and in particular of minor league baseball branding, have been wondering that, especially since minor league baseball put out the new minor league baseball logo that looks so similar to the Major League Baseball logo for the whole league itself. So it's very interesting to hear you say that. I'm glad we have independent baseball for the fun, wacky branding still, because that's it's so much fun. This brand, you mentioned some of the different directions you were talking about going, and you talked about having a logo maybe that didn't have the character, and that I enjoyed hearing that process. What's the thinking in having a number of different marks versus having just sort of a more compact brand identity?
I often get asked that question, Paul, and my simple answer is, if everybody liked chocolate and vanilla ice cream, there wouldn't be Baskin and Robbins. So everybody likes a different look, different colors for different people, different logos. This particular brand, though, kind of it's a flying boxcar plane. It also, you can't fly a plane without a pilot. The plane itself was manufactured in Hagerstown, so you have the wrenches, and you got we wanted one logo that really kind of captured the fact that it was manufactured here. It just didn't fly through town. It was made here. So you have a lot of different aspects to this plane, like I just mentioned, and also the troops parachuted. They'd put 30 troops in the back of this plane, and they would parachute out into the zone that they needed to be in during the Korean War. And so we had the parachute. So we wanted to capture like the whole essence of the boxcar. It just wasn't made here. It was flown by somebody. Troops, jumped out of the back of it in parachutes. And you like to have a sleeve emblem, and the parachute we're using as a sleeve emblem. By the way, we will be revealing the uniforms come March. Sometime in March, we're going to be revealing 4 different uniforms. We'll be having the home white, the road gray, a Sunday uniform, and a batting practice uniform. And we'll be kind of featuring all this suite of logos, as you say, that would match up a particular style uniform with a particular hat, would match up color wise and image wise. So it gives you that ability when you have multiple logos, of course, not only to sell multiple merchandise, but have a different look on the field, which also helps sell that merchandise.
Okay, one last question, and I'll get you out of here. You said that the unveiling happened at the Aviation Museum, and that you got to actually experience this airplane itself. You've described the size of it, being able to back a trailer into it. I'm curious, just from your personal experience, actually being inside one of these things. What was that like for you to experience the airplane itself and just the scale and the history of it in that place?
Paul, my first reaction when I got on that plane was, how did they get this thing in the air? I mean, we're talking, 1950s, design and an old wooden floor in it, and this big shell, and it had to have like a double wing, so the fuselage was open to be able to back something into it. Then you look at that, and then you think, now they're going to put this tractor of all this, how did this thing get airborne, and how did it stay airborne? It's a very unique, and I say this with respect and admiration, it's a big clunky looking plane that is so unique that I've never seen a plane that quite looks like this plane. But it really, you stepped on this plane, and you really felt like you stepped back into the 1950s.
That's awesome. That's amazing. I was in a way hoping that was going to be your answer, because it's absolutely, that comes through in the logo. It comes through in the photos of the plane that you see, and it does look like an amazing piece of history right there. So
Yeah.
Chuck, thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is so much fun to talk about this brand. Where can people find you? Where can people find the team online, social media, etc.?
Well, www.hagerstownflyingboxcars.com is the website, and I can't even speak of all the different ways to find us on social media. We're all over social media, so every social media you can think of, but that's not my expertise.
Chuck, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you again, and I look forward to talking to you again about one of the many teams that you work with.
Yeah. All right, Paul. Good talking to you.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I'm so pleased to welcome back to the podcast Skye Dillon of Skye Design. Skye, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Paul. How are you?
I am doing very well. So excited to be talking about this fun new brand that you came up with. You shared some of the original concepts that you worked with along the way. So there's a lot to talk about in this brand. Now, this was really well received when it first dropped just earlier this offseason. This is a new one for us to be talking about. But I'll just ask you, in general, what were you charged with? What were the challenges when the team came to you and said, okay, we're the Hagerstown Flying Boxcars?
Yeah, well, I mean, just starting there, the fact that they already had the name nailed down really kind of streamlined the process for us. Authentic inspiration born from Hagerstown with the fair. There's an old factory called the Fairchild Aviation Factory, so known for building military planes over their history, and so that was kind of the natural inspiration for the nickname. Obviously, minor league baseball, something fun, maybe a little bit quirky, never been done before. So Flying Boxcars kind of checks that box. So when the team approached us, they kind of wanted to toe that line between something that was really fan friendly and fun and played into that really over the top name, but at the same time being able to flex to a more of a regal state when necessary. So the idea of having some kind of a logo system that could be dynamic like that was our first order of business.
It's interesting. I think in minor league baseball, I feel like it's harder to make a human being into a sort of cartoony character than it is an animal. Like I said, you shared some of your initial concepts, and some of the initial work that you did in the early design phase involved a warthog rather than a human being. Tell me what you were thinking when you started with an animal and ended up with a person.
Yeah, so we, kind of the first round that we took at it was more of just kind of sharing loose ideas. So even before the sketch phase, we just kind of brainstormed around the table different character ideas, different ways that this theme could come to life. So there were some that resonated and some that were no-goes. So for example, the idea of perhaps the Maryland flag pattern playing a role. The calico cat is somewhat relevant to the region, and their pattern could have felt like the Maryland flag, but that was one that was immediately axed and didn't make it further than that first conversation.
I thought you were required by law to incorporate the Maryland flag into any Maryland sports team. I
That's
thought
what I'm
that.
saying. Like, it's just kind of a go-to muscle memory for a team in Maryland. So that was shot down. The Warthog was on the table right away. Frank Bolton, one of the consultants on this project for the ownership group, thought that could be a fun connection to the A-10 Warthog that was also built by the Fairchild factory back in the day. So there was kind of a connection there. So that was the initial character that we started with. We also looked at perhaps having the airplane itself being the character, but that didn't last too long when you start looking around. The Aberdeen Ironbirds obviously do a similar approach for their identity. So that didn't really, gain any traction.
Yeah.
So then the idea of some kind of a vintage aviation pilot that could also kind of represent the blue collar workers that built these airplanes back in the day, and kind of that spirit of the city of Hagerstown, the people themselves. That was a way that we could still again interact with the plane in a fun way without the plane itself being the character, and give the mark a unique look.
And the plane is not the character, and you can see in some of your early sketches here, the ones where the plane was the character, you can see where it does feel like that Ironbirds brand. But the solution to that was not to have a traditional pilot inside a plane, but rather a pilot on top of the plane, which is, this is an enormous plane. I mean, its main feature is that it's this big cavernous open space, basically. And so to have this, plus sized human being on top of this gigantic plane, there's a scale shift happening there that makes it sort of interesting visually. Was that a challenge to work with?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, that basically pushes it into this much more larger than life, place, if you will. It gives it more gravitas. Definitely pushes into that much more of a caricatured look. Which, anytime we're designing a logo, you're trying to move away from an illustration per se and create something that can feel more like a mark or an icon. And so the interaction of the pilot, interacting with the plane in that way was a way that we could achieve that. So you're kind of, again, at first glance, when you see the mark, you're seeing baseball and the flying boxcar all represented equally, as opposed to one larger than the other.
There's a sort of sensibility about this that captures a previous era, and part of it is that the plane is from a previous era, but the sort of the helmet and the goggles and this character that you have definitely feel like they're sort of from a bygone era, and I'm assuming that's intentional. What were your design approaches to capturing that old feeling but making it a contemporary logo?
Yeah, that's a great observation. I think just thinking about baseball as a sport, the romance of baseball, there's a lot of nostalgia there. So, in regard to trying to create kind of a timeless character, it made sense to turn back the clock a little bit and tap into the roots from when the plane really was its most relevant in use, which was the World War II era. So finding a character and creating a character that felt like it was, kind of from a time machine back in that particular era seemed to be the most authentic way to approach this. And also, anytime you're dealing with a human mascot, especially nowadays with just obviously the number of different challenges that exist in that regard, you're trying to find something inclusive that represents everyone. And so, almost going to this mythological version of a pilot from those days puts it in more of that fictional place, as opposed to a modern day interpretation.
Well, and I was going to ask you about the color choices. The metallic plane is the same color as the human being, right? Like, so you've completely removed any question of sort of race and identity in that regard, which I'm sure is a challenge, and I'm sure is intentional in today's day and age of designing logos.
We're obviously always up for a challenge, and that's the beauty of a system, is you have multiple marks that can be utilized different ways. So the fact that we have the pilot for certain instances, but we also have the plane by itself, the bats as the side fuselage element, also with the cap mark, the lettering, sleeve patch. There's lots of other marks in the system that complement the pilot for when that's used.
When you get away from the plane and the character, the pilot, there are some other marks here, and I know that they are throwing back to they're an homage to some logos from the factory itself. You've got one that's a couple of wrenches with a sort of, now that I look at it, kind of like a Seattle Pilots
Hmm.
wings in
That kind
there.
of classic wing silhouette.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got the letter H with the wings on it. What were some of the inspirations visually for some of these other marks that that evoke the company itself?
Yeah. So, so many times the answer is right there in front of you, and you don't have to really overthink things. And so, just looking at Fairchild, as Fairchild Factory was the home place of the flying boxcar where it was built. First thing we noticed was their logo of this silhouette of a Pegasus in profile with this really dynamic wing that was like, oh, there's something there. There's a lot of energy, motion, but it also has a timeless element to it, and certainly authentic to the region and our audience. So that wing became really that wing became kind of the genesis for a lot of these extensions that you see. So it kind of works its way into the system in multiple places. You mentioned the wing to H as the starting point, but then carrying that over into all of the lettering with the first letter of each word mark has that same Fairchild wing. The H mark that you mentioned with the wrenches kind of pays tribute to the factory nature. Again, the interesting dynamic to this piece is that most of these aviation related identities in sports are more military related,
Mm.
in the sense of on the offensive, attacking. Whereas this is a cargo plane, so it was meant to deliver materials and supplies to troops around the globe. So that was an interesting dynamic where we could take a fun spin on it, where it was, again, you're thinking family friendly. It's a much more uh, approachable aspect, if you will. And so in some of those other marks, you'll see, for example, this idea of, well, we got to have it, delivering baseballs with parachutes. I mean, those are some of the most iconic photos that you see when you look up the flying boxcar, is these parachute drops that they have with supplies. So that made for a natural sleeve patch, was having the flying boxcar flying by, dropping some parachuted baseballs.
You've anticipated what my next question was going to be, because I really really like this. In fact, I try not to rank things, but this one is the one that just jumps out at me. Like, if I'm going to buy one of these logos on a shirt or something, I love that roundel logo that you did with the plane, and then it's got two parachutes. And when you talk about delivering supplies, they're delivering baseballs. Like, here comes baseballs to save the day. And so that logo in particular is one that I really like, the story that it tells of this old-timey plane dropping baseballs to save the day. And I'm picturing little tiny parachutes on regular sized baseballs there. So
Right.
again, more scale shift though, right? Like this
Hmm.
enormous plane dropping a parachute, and the cargo that it's dropping is a little baseball. And so, there's a lot of sort of mind bending that's going on when you look at the things, the either an enormous pilot on a regular sized plane, or a tiny plane with a regular sized pilot on it, and now this parachute drop with the baseballs. I mean, that's a really, effective design technique, and visually really interesting. That must have been fun for you to work with as a designer.
It definitely was. When you think about, you had mentioned, kind of one of your first questions was about some of the initial exploration that we did, and just thinking in terms of that unique, element of this, where it is a cargo plane delivering supplies. We looked at a number of different ways that could be represented. So we had crates with wings. We had, crates with baseballs in them. We had actual box cars with wings on them. So just kind of like doing a full spread of exploration around how that cargo element could be represented. And this felt like the right fit for the, as you mentioned, for the listeners, that silhouette of the plane in the distance dropping the parachuted baseballs. It kind of was a perfect balance between a classic mark, but also whimsical enough that it could work in the context of minor league baseball.
So I'm looking also at these word marks, and you mentioned that the wings from the Fairchild Pegasus, appear in a couple of different word marks, with the H of Hub City and the H of Hagerstown, of course, and then on the F of Flying Boxcars. One of the conventions that you use that I really like, and I haven't seen very much, and you had an opportunity here with the letter X existing in this script, but the X in a boxcars script that you created reflects the propellers of the airplane. And that's, introducing type as image into the middle of a word must be a difficult challenge from a design standpoint.
Again, we're up for any challenge, but yeah, it's sometimes there's opportunities where just based on the letters that you're given or the theme that you're given, sometimes there's opportunities that wouldn't have otherwise uh, been there. And in our case, that X was too good to pass up. I mean, just as we were sketching on that, again, anytime you're creating an identity, you're trying to create something that immediately is memorable and jumps off the page. And again, knowing that the aesthetic for baseball sort of feels repetitive, you'll see lots of scripts, you'll see lots of block arched fonts. So in a world full of baseball scripts and other lettering that feels very similar in nature, anything you can do to really become ownable and distinct is key. So that's something we're always looking for as we're exploring is what's something we can push. Obviously not too much, but just one little hook within a mark that can really give it that ownable quality. And for us, the X was that perfect way to inject some energy, transforming it into the propeller from the plane. And the script itself, based on almost like that more, vintage industrial style mono weight script, which ties very well with the new identity for downtown Hagerstown. So one of the first things that the ownership group did with us when we met with them was shared this new revitalization branding for the new downtown area or whatnot, kind of this modern vision for what Hagerstown has kind of grown into the last decade or so and where it plans to move into the future. So kind of this marriage of past and present with the, industrial brick buildings all revitalized for these more modern uses. And so kind of capturing that essence with a monoweight script like this felt like it was the right tone as opposed to something maybe perhaps more like the Kansas City Royals that has more of that tapering nature to it.
One of the details about this boxcars script, when you look at the mock-up of the home uniform, the center of that X propeller falls right on where a button would be on the uniform. That is a level of detail that is, really pretty remarkable when you actually, look at it. I'm curious to know, that, you mocked that up and obviously it looks great in this mock-up. How precise can they be on when they actually manufacture these uniforms? Can they do that? Can they put the center of that X right where the button is supposed to be?
I mean, now that you told me that that's what's happening there, they have to be able to find a way to do that. Again, it's a gift, too good to pass up. I honestly had not noticed that until you just brought that up, but that is fascinating.
It is fascinating. I thought, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 white buttons and one red button right in the middle of the X of boxcars there. I was,
Gosh,
I,
well,
we're,
like I said, I mean, that's too good to pass up now. They got to figure out a way to do that.
all right. One last question for you. I asked Chuck this question in the previous segment here. Did you get the opportunity to actually go experience the boxcars? I know that you're not in Maryland in your studios. Did you get to travel and see the actual airplanes?
So I'm remiss to say that I did not get to see them in person, and that's something that it was just the nature of the project. It was basically we had a month to
Yeah.
do the entire project. It was right in the middle of the summer. We had plans to be in Seattle for the All-Star game since we assisted with the branding there collaboratively, and so just one of those things where between logistics or whatever, we couldn't make it down to see it in person. But I'm a huge aviation fan. Over the years, I've seen it at different times, but just not during the course of this project.
Well, one of the great things about your line of work is that you get to become an expert on one thing at a time, right? Like every time you create a brand, you get to become an expert on certain things. So it must have been fun, especially if you're an aviation fan, to get to research these box cars and get really into the nitty gritty. And there's, so much information out there about them now. How how much a part of the process is that for you? Just like getting deep, deep, deep into, you know, the flying boxcar as a thing before you're even thinking about the design.
Yeah, no, I think it's kind of like actors, they got to be in the mindset of the character, immersed in that world almost, for a long period of time leading up to the actual time where they're on screen recording. And for us, it's the same way. Again, our just the nature of what we do, the fact that, different projects have different themes, every project is different, so to really deliver something unique for each client, it's important to never get complacent, and so our process is proven in the sense that by always emphasizing that discover phase at the beginning, you're setting aside the time necessary to uncover those gems that inevitably lead to some of these great nuggets throughout the identity that can tie it all together, that without investing that time, it's tough to really go deeper than, just kind of what would be expected. And obviously with branding, it's always the unexpected that makes things iconic.
Well, this brand has so many fun details in it, and it's so much fun to talk about. And I so appreciate you coming on and chatting with me about it. Sky, where can everyone find you and all of the work you're doing at all levels of baseball right now?
Yeah. So I may have mentioned it before, but we're in the process of a site redesign. So it's almost on deck, ready to go, but you can still visit us. Our URL is sdsbranding.com. And on social, we're on Twitter X at Sky_Dylan.
Someday that's going to be Twitter again. This X thing is not meant to last. It's going to be Twitter again. Sky, thank you so much. This has been fun.
You got it, Paul, anytime.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I'm so pleased to be joined by my good friend Dan Simon of Studio Simon. Dan, good morning. It's time for Studio Simon Stumpers. How are you doing?
I am fantastic as always, Paul. How are you?
Well, I'm good. I've limbered up. I'm ready for Studio Simon Stumpers here. I've tried to get the brain going and I'm sort of on my toes, ready to see what angle we're going to be going to approach a stumper about the Hagerstown Flying Boxcars. Could be airplanes, could be toasters because the thing looks like a big toaster, could be aviation history having to do with wars. I don't know. Could be anything. So I'm curious to see where you are going to take us on this Studio Simon stumper regarding the Hagerstown Flying Boxcars.
Okay, well, let's fly right into it then.
Uh,
Okay, the Hagerstown Flying Boxcars, as has been established previously in this episode, are named after a type of military aircraft. And there have been a number of teams that have been baseball teams and in other sports as well that have been named after military aircraft or squadrons. For instance, before moving to Greenville, South Carolina, the Drive played in Columbia, South Carolina, as the Capital City Bombers, named after the Doolittle Raiders, World War II fighter pilots who trained in Columbia, South Carolina. Also, as detailed in a 2016 as part of your story behind the nickname series on sportslogos.net, there is the Lakeland Flying Tigers, whose ballpark, Joker Marchant Stadium, I believe that's how it's pronounced. Stadium, right? That's how it's pronounced.
Stadium, yeah,
I'm
just like that. You nailed it. Nailed it in one.
Was built on the site of a former airfield that was a training facility for World War II pilots. And the Flying Tigers were I believe, a squadron as opposed to a type of aircraft. And also in Surprise, Arizona, which is now the spring training home to the world champion Texas Rangers and the Kansas City Royals, there was a team that played but for one season, the 2005 inaugural season of the now defunct Independent Golden Baseball League. And that team had such a name. So our Studio Simon Stumper today asks, what was the name of that team? Was it A, the Surprise Battlebirds? Was it B, the Surprise Screaming Eagles? Or C, the Surprise Fightin' Falcons?
This is the league that you, as part of a team, designed all of the logos for. Am I right about that?
That is correct. For me and my great friend Joe Bosack, who has never been on this podcast, even though he has done several minor league identities. We'll go over those at some point, and maybe we'll get him on.
Be a great idea.
Get him on, that is.
Yeah.
He and I worked on that project together. We did all 8 of the original teams from their inaugural season in 2005. We did the 9th team, the Reno Silver Sox, the following year. Then the league expanded, and we were not involved in any of the subsequent brand identity development there, but did the first 9 of those teams. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of like Todd Radom has done all the teams in the Big 3 basketball league.
Yeah.
I've actually been involved in several projects where we have done all the teams in one league. As a matter of fact, I believe every time I've done that, it's been with Joe Bosak and me collaborating on it, which makes for just a great time doing it, working with Joe and doing all those teams. But we're getting away from.
Yeah,
from,
I wasn't trying to kick the can down the road here, but maybe that's a great episode. Maybe just have you and Joe on, and the 3 of us will talk about that league and those logos. That would be a great episode. So the teams are, to revisit, I'm going to do them in reverse order because I remember the second 2, the Fighting Falcons and the Screaming Eagles. And what was the first one?
The Surprise Battlebirds.
The Surprise Battlebirds. So Fighting Falcons and Battlebirds are both alliterative. I don't know the answer to this, nor did I Google it while I was attempting to distract you with questions about you and Joe Bosak and the Golden Baseball League. But not having any way to really suss and not being terribly familiar with that league, I was hoping one of them would just jump out and sound familiar to me. I'm going to go Screaming Eagles because there was just the faintest hint of recognition. Maybe it's because I am a Philadelphia Eagles fan and I just want that to be the answer. But I'm going to go Screaming Eagles. I think Battlebirds or Fighting Falcons could have been it too, but I don't know. There was the slightest hint of recognition that registered when you said Screaming Eagles.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to tell you whether you're correct or incorrect until I go through the answer to this question. First of all, the reason that the team in Surprise, Arizona was named after a military aircraft is because Surprise is located minutes from Luke Air Force Base in Glendale, Arizona.
I actually remember trying to get to that ballpark for a spring training game, and we ended up at that airfield. We ended up all sort of turned around, and the GPS directions failed us a little bit. We ended up finding our way because you could see the stadium lights, but I think we ended up at that airfield trying to find our way to the parking lot for that spring training facility. Well,
there's another thing we have in common because I too have seen a spring training game in Surprise, Arizona. No chance that it would have been the same game you went to because it was many years ago, back when I lived in Los Angeles. Okay, so Surprise, as I mentioned, is located minutes from Luke Air Force Base. Luke Air Force Base is named after a World War I flying ace named Frank Luke Jr., who was a Phoenix native known as the Arizona Balloon Buster. Called that because he was in World War I, I did not even know that this was a thing. He shot down balloons. Now, we're not talking about party balloons. We're talking about, the types of balloons that you see at festivals and stuff, used as aircraft. And I just can't even imagine a war where balloons were used to fight the war. It seems like that'd be a relatively easy thing to shoot down, even from the ground, wouldn't you think?
I would think that. And for whatever reason, this is a TV show I haven't seen in probably 20 years. But I remember the made-for-TV miniseries V, starring Mark Singer, which had alien lizards dressed as people show up, pretending to be our friends, but really trying to steal our water. Spoiler alert. It ended with a battle scene where we learned how to basically poison our water supply against these lizards. And we were doing it, we human beings were doing it with hot air balloons. We sent up a bunch of hot air balloons with this red powder, and they were going to try to shoot us down. But then they realized if they shot us down, then they were just spreading this stuff to all the water. So when you brought up hot air balloons being used in war, I, of course, went to the TV show V.
Okay, which is where naturally anyone would go. Frank Luke Jr. was also the first aviator awarded the Medal of Honor. Unfortunately, he died in World War I. But during World War II, Luke Air Force Base was the country's largest fighter training base and earned the nickname Home of the Fighter Pilot. And it is the only F-16 training base in the world. And what is the nickname for F-16 fighter jets?
Screaming Eagle.
Fighting Falcon. And so that was the name of the surprise team, the surprise Fighting Falcons. And if anyone looks up that logo, which you can find, that particular logo was done by Joe Bosack. So if you're curious what some of his older work might look like, let's see, that was 2000. We did that in 2004, 20 years ago. That's some of Joe's work. So that's our stumper for today.
Perhaps the subject of a future episode of Baseball by Design. Maybe we'll just get into the Golden Baseball League and talk with you and Joe, and that'll be the way we get Joe onto this podcast. Director
of marketing for the Golden Baseball League at that time was friend of the show, Greg Coleman, now the president, Erie Seawolves. So he would be a natural guest as well. I think we should book it.
Just convene the four of us. It'd be a fun roundtable to talk about that Golden Baseball League. Dan, thank you so much. This has been fun as always and informative. And so I appreciate you bringing your studio stumpers.
Leave all that in.
I was gonna say.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
What I'm trying to say is Studio Simon Stumpers are fun. I appreciate getting to chat with you every single week, and we will see you next week.
Well, I appreciate you, Paul. I appreciate all of you listeners, and I will see all of you next week as well. Bye-bye.